I'm Jeff Getman with American Purpose. I think I know everybody, and everybody knows you, Ken. We invited, in a way, to keep this relatively small, intimate, participant intensive, and we're very grateful for your time. Ken was in Germany for a conference, and he was back in the United States, and then he hustled back to Japan, where he's been for a number of days now. And I can't think of anybody better placed to give us a sense of the meaning of the murder of Shinzo Abe, put it into context, political, social, and economic, and give us some hints about its impact, its earliest of days. But these moments can affect the shape of a country's politics, and I would say in particular in times like these. Ken, welcome. It's late there. It's really very late. We're going to do this for 45 minutes, hard stop, 10:45 Eastern, and we agreed, Ken, that this would be not anything formal from your side, although you're going to be free to say whatever you want to say, but more of a conversation. Ken, why don't you lead off, share some observations with us from there. I'll ask a couple questions and we'll quickly open it up. Does that suit?
Sounds very good to me. Now, thank you, Jeff. Look, I'm delighted, honored, and it's a very distinguished crowd that I'm addressing here. So especially honored. It is late here in Tokyo, but look, this is obviously an immensely sad time in Japan, especially sad time for those who are close to Shinzo Abe. And I've met with a number of his close collaborators who are old friends of mine this week, and they are they're obviously quite rattled, devastated. This is the murder, and hearing Jeff say that word in Japan, they talk about it more politely as the death rather than the murder or the assassination. It is a profoundly painful subject. It's personally painful to me. I've known Shinzo Abe, had known him for almost 20 years, and was supposed to see him Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m. and had seen him last in May, had seen him before that on a Zoom in February. Shinzo Abe was an extraordinary leader. First and foremost, let me note that to get elected to public office, you have to have the ability to attract voters. And in a parliamentary system like in Japan, you have to have the ability to convince your peers in the Diet in particular to trust you, since there's not a direct election of the prime minister. That skill is a very different skill from the skill that Shinzo Abe had, which was the skill of strategic foresight. He had, and he wasn't always right, but he had a sense of things back when people in the United States were talking about China as a potential responsible stakeholder. Abe, going back to the late 1990s, early 2000s, already was deeply skeptical about what the rise of China meant, for the world and for Japan in particular. And he was able, and he came from a remarkable background. Of course, his father had been foreign minister, Shintaro Abe. His grandfather had been Prime Minister Kishi, Prime Minister in the late 1950s, early 1960s, who actually was key to the U.S.-Japan alliance in those days, though had been rated a war hero by a war criminal by the United States, of course, for his activities during World War II. He came from this very distinguished family, but Abe was never a slacker. This was a man who believed in hard work, believed in doing his homework, and so he combined a kind of politician's gift for dealing with people, and we saw that in the way he interacted with world leaders. And I would argue, and we can get into the Q&A later, that he was the leader of the free world in a way that Angela Merkel never was, and that he was able to deal with people in Japan as a communicator, bring them along, convince them. He had a clear strategic vision. The strategic vision was quite simple, that the days of the post-war period were over, and that Japan needed to stop hiding behind a kind of passive multilateralism that often was the direction of its foreign policy, a direction it did not set, but that it handled in a kind of inbox, outbox manner. And then instead, Japan needed to face realities. The central reality being the rise of China and the direct security threat and economic threat that China posed to Japan. The second being that as a result of that threat, Japan needed to be deeply grounded in the US-Japan alliance, which was first and foremost an alliance of democracies, but was also, as importantly, a military alliance. And that Abe felt that this alliance had to be grounded very firmly, such that not just that in the sense that the United States itself would feel inextricably bound to Japan and to Japan's defense, but the best way to make the alliance more effective, more reliable. And he had severe doubts that actually arose during the Obama administration, as he admitted in an interview in The Economist earlier this year, that the best way for this alliance to be firmly grounded was for Japan to start taking far more responsibility for its own security and to become more of a peer in the alliance to the United States. Thirdly, he felt that in order to effectively take on China and take on China in the broadest sense, this does not mean militarily, but this means in terms of the promotion of democratic values, trade, free and open commerce, that you had to expand the playing field, and that by defining the playing field as simply Asia, that put Japan at a disadvantage that China was going to dominate in Asia. And instead, as we all know, Abe broadened the playing field from Asia to the Indo-Pacific, including the great democracies of Asia, or of the Indo-Pacific, the United States, Australia, and India together. And Abe was key to revitalizing the Quad and to presenting a compelling vision of what the future of Asia might be like, a vision that was so compelling that it was adopted by President Trump early in his term in February of 2017, when Prime Minister Abe went to visit President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and the United States signed on to the concept of the free and open Indo-Pacific, a concept that later was signed on to by the Australians, to a lesser degree by the Indians, just to a similar degree by the French, the Brits, et cetera. And so Shinzo Abe had this vision of what the free and open Indo-Pacific was going to look like, and he was able to achieve a strategic convergence with the United States. He's one of the few world leaders, I think, when you think of the United States and our strategic outlook. Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, there are very few allies of the United States that have shaped the way that we fundamentally understand the world. And Shinzo Abe was one of these individuals. And so he certainly reshaped the way we understood international affairs, the centrality of the Indo-Pacific. We renamed our Pacific Command to the Indo-Pacific Command, and so forth. But at the same time, I should note, Abe had numerous other major triumphs. When he was first prime minister in a short term from 2006 to 2007, had health problems. He suffered from an autoimmune disease and had to resign office unexpectedly in a manner that was very embarrassing to him. And he felt that he had failed to live up to the legacy of both his father and grandfather. And Abe vowed to do what it would take to come back into office, not because he had a personal goal of redemption, though he certainly felt redemption when he came back into office, but because he sensed the need that Japan needed to once again be a player in international affairs. And along these lines, Prime Minister Abe realized he had to restructure the government of Japan. He spent his time in exile, out of office for about 5 years, thinking about what went wrong during his first term. He restructured the Japanese government, made the Ministry of Finance no longer the most important ministry, created a National Security Council, and continued the defense transformation that he began. He had numerous other great accomplishments, obviously, including the TPP-11 after the United States pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Abe went ahead and created the CPTPP, an 11-member trading bloc in Asia that includes obviously Australia, Canada, a number of Latin American countries, New Zealand and the like. And he also lastly revitalized the unofficial Japanese-Taiwanese relationship by talking openly about Taiwan security, talking openly about the Taiwan scenario, what it meant for Japan. And Abe was an absolutely beloved figure in Taiwan. With regard to Japan itself, and I'll wrap up on this, Abe never really got the credit that he deserved, though he was Japan's longest serving prime minister in modern times, and certainly its most transformative. The media in Japan is liberal. It's not a big secret. The Yomiuri, the Asahi Shimbun was quite critical. A left-wing newspaper, this is the most widely read paper in Japan, was quite critical. The prime minister didn't cut him very much slack. And he didn't in life have the stature that he had around the world. And I think it was really only upon his brutal assassination that the Japanese themselves, the vast majority of Japanese, came to a much deeper appreciation of Abe's contributions to Japan and to the world more broadly. It's been a little bizarre being here during this period. Unlike in the United States, we have Japanese society should know it's a very ritualized society. Almost every aspect of life, when you meet an individual, when you dine out with them, there are all sorts of rituals you have to do. But there is actually no ritual for mourning a political leader. Whereas in the United States, George H.W. Bush dies, Gerald Ford dies, the city of Washington essentially closes down, flags are at half-mast, et cetera, around the country, tributes pouring in. In Japan, it's not quite that way. Politics are not central to life in Japan. I think that was key to the transformation of Japan in the post-war period. And so I arrived in Tokyo, I arrived Tuesday afternoon, too late for the funeral. And I get to my hotel and people are sitting in the, laughing, having tea in the coffee shop and the like. And life really sort of goes on as normal here, which is sort of bizarre in some ways. At the point I got here, the TV, there were all sorts of other programs on, rather than the kind of constant discussions of Abe's legacy that one might have expected in the United States. Even after the funeral, you don't quite see the man in the street interviews, but there will be a national memorial service for the prime minister in September. And I think as we approach that point, we'll have more of a crescendo of reflection on Prime Minister Abe's life and legacy, which really was an extraordinary one, and one that I believe will shape the future of Japanese politics for some time. So let me just leave it on, sort of my initial thoughts, Jeff. Thank you.
Ken, that's enormously helpful. I'm going to pose one question before I open it up. Feel free to put your questions in chat or use the raised hand function. And Carolyn, when I miss someone's raised hand, please alert me. Ken, if I can put it in shorthand, that Shinzo Abe pushed for Japanese foreign policy to grow up. Could you speak to two things? One, Russia's war in Ukraine, how Abe saw this and its impact on the Japanese foreign policy establishment. And the second, what now after Prime Minister Abe's death, as things often don't run in a linear fashion from A to B to C to D, what do you suspect the shape of this conversation about Japanese foreign policy will look like in the next couple of years or so?
Yeah, no, the great questions. Look, on Russia, first of all, Abe was a bit of an outlier in terms of the current consensus on Russia. Prime Minister Abe was obsessed in part because his father, the late Foreign Minister Shintaro Abe, spent so much of the last year of his life, which coincided with the collapse of the Soviet Union, seeking to get the northern territories, which had been taken from Japan by the Russians at the end of World War II, trying to bring them back to Japan. And so his father had spent enormous time. His father was dying of cancer in that year, literally would take meetings with Edward Shevardnadze, then the Soviet or foreign minister at the end of the Soviet Union, and he would literally dying of cancer. He was emaciated. He would walk in and literally have stuffing under his shirt so that the Shevardnadze would have no idea that he was so close to death. And Abe himself felt that loyal to his father's vision, and he engaged in years of diplomacy with Vladimir Putin over the Northern Territories. They met, I believe, more than 30 times over 9 years. They met in both Japan and in Russia. And Abe tried to structure an economic aid package to bring Putin along so that the Northern Territories, at least two of the Northern Territories, might be returned to Japan. That was not to be. And Abe remained more of an advocate of diplomacy with Russia at the end. But once the war began, I think the prime minister's view was like so much of the view of Japanese elites now, that we needed firmness. If we couldn't avert the war by force, that we needed great firmness in order to prevent a Russian victory, as much for the people of Ukraine as for the people of Taiwan, in the sense that, though I've got to say, Abe never said, this is the vision that a lot of people said, I did not hear Abe explicitly say this, the view that the war in Ukraine is being followed by Xi Jinping, and in order to protect Taiwan, we need to send a very clear signal that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Your second question, what is his legacy on the foreign policy stage? It's complicated. Abe's successor as prime minister, second successor, Prime Minister Kishida, is from a different wing of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party than Prime Minister Abe. Prime Minister Abe had the largest faction in the LDP. He was definitely a member of the more conservative wing, whereas Prime Minister Kishida is considered a liberal in terms of the LDP. The LDP is a broad ruling party. The opposition parties in Japan are far weaker, and the LDP consists of numerous groupings. Kishida himself had been pressured by Prime Minister Abe and criticized from the right on numerous occasions during his tenure in the past year. And Kishida is definitely more of a diplomacy-oriented leader, as it were, whereas Abe has combined both diplomacy and deterrence as his policy. And Abe never forgot the importance of reaching out and dealing with the Chinese on a regular basis, even while he understood the threat very deeply. The real question for Prime Minister Kishida is what to make of the Abe legacy and how much he should be driven by it. The first and foremost question is the issue of constitutional reform to change Japan's post-war pacifist constitution. In the aftermath of the assassination, the LDP and its allies received more than the two-thirds majority they would need in Japan's upper house to effect constitutional reform. And there's now a belief that in Prime Minister Abe's memory, this constitutional reform will be enacted. There may be other constitutional reforms as well, but Kishida is I'd say more of an establishment, distinguished figure, less of a strategic thinker than Prime Minister Abe was. But the legacy really does weigh heavily on Kishida because his own instincts are towards consensus diplomacy rather than a hard line. Though he's been very firm on Ukraine for a Japanese leader and has really stayed aligned largely with the United States here and has imposed sanctions, although Japan continues to get natural gas through the Sakhalin pipeline, which we can talk about in a bit. But overall, he is definitely of a softer mold than Abe was. And so the real question becomes, does Prime Minister Kishida take on the Abe line in a sort of manner now that Abe will be treated more hagiographically And does he find grounding for his own policies in Abe's writings and thoughts? And I think it's a fair question, though. Some cases they go against his own instincts.
So as I think that tends to Uli's question in chat, and Uli, we can come back to you again later. I want to call on Jane and Ken. And Jane, hi, Jane, and you have the floor.
Well, first of all, hello, everybody. And Jeff, I thought your trip to Ukraine and environs was a tour de force. I thought it was amazing. And I love it that you send all these links to music, and it just, you know, it's the whole package. So congratulations.
Thank you.
On this is very interesting. I was going to ask also about amending the Constitution, but on that point, if the Constitution is amended, and it sounds like it's a fait accompli, then what? Is Japan not just rearming? Is Japan thinking about acquiring a nuclear weapon? And if that happens, then what in the Republic of Korea and the region and et cetera? I recalled it was the past president who said maybe Asia should arm, but just wondering about that. And second question is, I love the comment about strategic thinker. With his death, where is one in the world who is in elected office leading a country?
You know, two great questions. Look, on the constitutional reform, to begin with, I don't think the impact is going to be as deep as might have been the case, say, 20 or 30 years ago. First of all, Prime Minister Abe already changed the interpretation of the famous Article 9 to allow for collective self-defense. And so the real question becomes whether or not Japan will acquire forward strike capabilities, which increasingly looks like they need to have counter strike capabilities in order to face the growing Chinese threat, including the Chinese military threat. At this stage, I think no Japanese prime minister would call for nuclear weapons. That is not on the table, and I certainly don't see it on the table at any point in the coming decades. But Prime Minister Abe did call for nuclear sharing, in which Japan would have some say over the U.S. use and basing of nuclear weapons in Japan. I think that is probably a welcome thing. There was great concern in Japan, as there was in Germany and among other European allies, about a change in U.S. nuclear declaratory policy towards no first use, and that's no first strike, and that's now off the table because of the uproar from our allies. So I think that. But the question for Japan is the return to being a normal nation, and meaning the return to a more visible military and civil society, more respect for the military. The military is badly paid in Japan, badly garrisoned, doesn't quite have the same. It doesn't really have the status that it ought to, and so. And Japan needs, given the demographic challenge in this country, which is deep, and the existential threats that it faces, there's a need to have a strong deterrent, a strong military, and the like. But the Japanese utterly understand that they have to be grounded in the alliance. And Prime Minister, and the good news out of Seoul these days is that President Yoon's government marks a real change in terms of its attitude towards Japan and also its attitude towards the United States. And so there's a potential for real momentum in the U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral relationship now, and one that Prime Minister Kishida is eager to build on.
So thank you, Jane, and for making time from a different.
But my other question, Jeff, was about a strategic thinker in the world.
Oh.
I'm so
Please.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, absolutely. If you please call me if anybody knows. I'll give you. It's look, we have. You look at. Look at Germany. You look at France. You look. It is really hard to think of a a leader who has the kind of comprehensive strategic vision that you look at the UK. I mean, Tom Tugendhat, I guess, is one person who I think has a clear strategic vision in the Conservative Party leadership race. I don't know that he's going to be, it doesn't look like he's going to make it, but there is a real absence of strategic leadership at a major level at this point. It's particularly unfortunate. And I don't have much hope at this stage. And part of it is the 24-hour news cycle, gotcha politics, social media, that makes it even more difficult to be a strategic thinker and to stay with the courage of your convictions when they may be unpopular as well.
All right. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Ken. We have 16 minutes to hard stop you all. I have Ken Jensen and then Patrick Chamarel. Ken?
I'm going to pass because Ken has already answered the question I was going to ask. Thanks.
Fair enough. And thanks for being with us, Ken. Patrick, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, Ken, for speaking so eloquently about Abe's strategic vision and accomplishment at this difficult moment. I want to take the conversation just maybe a little lower, at a lower plane. I read in the Financial Times a few days ago that one of the motivations of the murderer might have been that his mother was ruined after giving money to the church or the sect that Abe belonged to. So I have two questions about this. First of all, have you heard anything more about this, since you got to Japan? And second, did you have any impression at a given moment in your conversations with Abe of his spirituality, or what would inspire him in that realm?
Yeah, look, the murderer was upset because his mother had been a member of the Unification Church and had given over yen 1 million, $700,000 to the Unification Church during a difficult period in her lives that essentially ruined the family financially. Shinzo Abe was not a member of the Unification Church. The Unification Church had ties to the Liberal Democratic Party. He was a Buddhist, had a Buddhist funeral, was always interested in India. I suspect in part for those reasons as well. But the Unification Church is not a big political entity in Japan. It is it comes out of South Korea. I don't think it has more than 30 or 40,000 members here. There's definitely been discussions of it. The bigger discussions have been about the tragedy of the shooting that the prime minister was. There was one bullet fired at him, and which didn't really hurt him. And then he turned around to look at what happened. And the Japanese, in part, the pacifist constitution, the lack of focus on counter-strike capability for the country itself. The police are armed, but they're not ready to shoot. If somebody, we all remember the scene when John Hinckley fired at President Reagan at the Washington Hilton, and the Secret Service jumped all over the president, protected him. He didn't realize that he had been shot until he was in the car going and started coughing up blood. And here, the police literally did not react, and they didn't jump on the shooter. They didn't take out their guns. They could have eliminated him, and Abe would have lived. And that's the great tragedy. Literally, that the man turned around, and the bullet went through his arm and all the way across his body, and he would have lived had the police taken action earlier. Of course, he would have lived had they enforced a security perimeter. But in Japan, there's obviously their guns are not readily available. There have been violent attacks, largely knife attacks. And for example, Ambassador Reischauer was attacked on the street here in Tokyo by a deranged man when Reischauer was walking outside of the embassy at some point in 1960, 61, 62, and almost died. And but there are violent attacks in politics. They're rare, but they do occur. But this was a homemade gun that the man made, and and he has admitted that he wasn't particularly angry at Shinzo Abe, that he was mad at the Unification Church. And Abe had the misfortune of agreeing to appear in a video on behalf of the Unification Church entity, a video that President Trump also appeared in, and a number of other world leaders. And this was after Trump left office, after Abe left office as prime minister, had appeared in. And it was it's this that led the man to decide he was going to kill the prime minister. The prime minister wasn't scheduled to be in Nara, the city where he was that day. He was supposed to be elsewhere. Schedule changed, and somehow the killer heard of the change in schedule and went directly to the location, armed and ready to do this. So it's and there's going to be repercussions for the local police, for the national police, for the way that politicians interact with the public, certainly here, that are going to be fundamental. This is a place where retail politics is valued, where you can be in Tokyo, you see politicians out on the street. Oftentimes they have these trucks with megaphones where they're talking to voters and greeting voters. All that's going to have to change. There is some sense among people here in Japan that the Abe assassination, and people are still in denial and coming to grips with it, that it sort of may mark kind of a Robert Kennedy assassination moment or a John Kennedy assassination moment, that sort of a sense that it's the end of the era of naivete and the beginning of what could be a far more daunting, depressing, and challenging time. But this is certainly, we've seen the unthinkable become thinkable in Ukraine. We've now seen it here we've seen it with the COVID pandemic, and now we've seen it with the Abe assassination. But this is something I think that touches a deep nerve among the Japanese, even those who are not Abe fans, because their sense was that Japan was a civilized society free from the kind of craziness that you see in the United States and other countries. And I think that's perhaps the most stunning thing for most Japanese, to imagine that this took place in a country not known for violence, in a country that treats its leaders with great respect, even if it doesn't agree with them. And so, it's certainly shaken Japanese society.
Ken, if I may ask another question, could you say something about Shinzo Abe's wife? You were close to him, you know her, you've been close to the family. My understanding was that she had in some ways broken the mold of the role of First Lady, and that was interesting. And that also, if I have it right, she was dubbed by some Japanese media as the opposition party because many of her views, in particular on political and social issues, contrasted with those views of her husband. Could you say a little bit about her?
Yeah, no, Aki is a remarkable woman in her own right. She is not a traditional Japanese woman who, sort of hides behind formality and, and the like. She is very much a modern woman, someone with her own career. She ran a bar for a while Abe held office. She is someone who let it be known, for example, during a period of great tension with Korea, that she was a fan of Korean soap operas and pop music, and she was harshly criticized for that. When you meet her, she's a very modern woman. She dresses in a modern way. She's very charming and a very strong woman. I'm trying to think of, there's nobody quite like her among first ladies of the United States, and she because of this independence she had from her husband, and the way she interacted with people. That being said, there is some speculation here in Tokyo that Mrs. Abe may herself feel an obligation to enter politics and to possibly run for her husband's diet seat. The speculation has been rampant, but she is now deep in mourning, and we'll have to see how that plays out. This is, obviously a devastating loss. She heard the news and was immediately summoned, went by train down to Nara where the assassination took place to join her husband in the hospital. And it was just an absolutely dreadful scene. She has carried herself with immense composure and grace since the assassination, accompanying the body in the hearse and receiving mourners at the apartment that she lives in with the prime minister's mother, who also survives them.
So, Ken, thank you. I'm going to ask a penultimate question to you, Jane, and then a final question to Ken, and we're going to wrap up. We've got 7 minutes to go. Jane, to your question, what's your crack at an answer? Who do you see on the world stage who brings vision? And in your former institution, the US Congress, maybe you have up-and-comers that you're mentoring and supporting.
Yeah, well, I asked the question because I don't know the answer. And I'll just say it on this call, I am somewhat impressed with the Biden effort to articulate a global strategy for US leadership. We haven't had one, my view. I wrote a book about this, as you know, Jeff, since the end of the Cold War. We have had hubris and defensive action over 4 presidencies. And this one is trying. That doesn't mean it's very successful yet, but they're trying. In some parts, I think the Asia piece is actually, maybe thanks to Shinzo Abe, I'm not arguing that, getting somewhere. And Europe is aligned on Ukraine, so yay. And the Middle East trip, I thought was a very mixed bag, the timing of it and the fist bump and the whole thing. But anyway, so I don't know the answer to it. Angela Merkel's star has fallen, in my view. I think she could have done a lot more now that I understand where Germany is to be a leader than she was, but okay. So Congress, is that a trick question? I mean, I couldn't be more depressed. The way Congress works now, the business model of Congress is blame the other side for not solving the problem. Because if you work with the other side, you are bipartisan. And that means you are primaried. That's a new verb. And that means you could lose. And most races are decided in primaries, not general elections. We may see something happen in some of the Senate elections because candidates on one side, my opinion, are so flawed. I'm not saying the candidates on the other side are so great, but the candidates on one side are so flawed. But I left because I felt that the place was incapable of really forward action. The only exception that I see at the moment is aid for Ukraine. I don't know how long that continues given 9.1% inflation, but you can't blame totally on Biden. You know, some of it's the Ukraine war, some of it is that first unfortunate package on COVID aid, in my view, which both parties supported, oh, by the way. But I just don't see how the business model changes in the short term. Maybe if we get through this midterm and somehow we think that there's going to be a fair election in 2024 and the candidates look pretty decent, there will be a refocus on Congress. But right at the moment, I have a chapter in my book called The Incredible Shrinking Congress. That is a bipartisan rant, not a partisan rant. And I wish I could be more optimistic, but you asked me, Jeff, that's what I think. If others disagree on this call, maybe you disagree. I don't know. Do you?
Well, that was all very direct. That's why I asked Jane. Jane's book is titled Insanity Defense: Why Our Failure to Confront Hard National Security Problems Makes Us Less Safe. We've hosted Jane on the book. If you are able, Carolyn, you might be able to fish that out, that Zoom, and post it in chat. Ken, the final question to you, we've got 3 minutes left. What does Japan need from the United States?
Wow. Look, I think Japan needs from the United States, and I agree completely with Congresswoman Harman on this 100%. On the question of what Japan needs from the United States, I think that Japan needs a sense that the United States will be there, will be present in the Indo-Pacific, will meet its defense commitments, will continue to be a beacon for the free and open Indo-Pacific. But most importantly, I think Japan needs the United States not just to be a military power, but also to start to include both Southeast Asia and the Pacific Island countries in its economic and strategic geography. That means taking ASEAN, the friendly ASEAN countries more seriously, taking the Pacific Island countries more seriously, and also getting the Europeans to be more present in those countries as well as a bulwark against China. Mm-hmm. So we've restructured our international development agencies, but as of yet to little effect. We really do need to start investing the hundreds of billions of dollars that they can make available, and the Biden administration has talked about now at both the Quad Summit and the G7, and start having an impact in those countries which tilt between us and China, and need to understand that we are there, we care about their future. Japan has spent a lot of time investing in those countries. And so a United States that is militarily strong, working in conjunction with Japan, a United States that is diplomatically and economically strong and focused on this region while meeting its commitments and doing what it needs to lead both in Europe and in the Middle East. I think that's what Japan wants. There is great concern in Japan, and I think a lot of it honestly misplaced, about the state of American democracy. But that is definitely something I keep on hearing from people, that they are concerned about the fate of our democracy. And I remind everybody that for all the shame of January 6th, on January 7th, the sitting Vice President of the United States did in fact make sure that a fair counting of the Electoral College happened, which he lost his job and his opponents were elected to office here, and that our constitutional democracy survived the day. But there is deep concern, in part from some of the images. There's also deep concern about the shootings in the United States that lead people to think our country is not politically or psychologically stable as well. So we need to do a better job on all counts.
So, Ken, it sounds to me like we need vision, and we also need some measure of stability and predictability. So, Ken and everybody who spent valuable time, thank you so much. We're right on the dot, 10:45 Eastern. Ken, you were generous. You've traveled. You had a whole day, a work dinner. It's close to midnight. Go to bed. But thank you so much for joining us. This was a great conversation. Really fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful seeing everybody. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day.